So there have been some recent developments in California politics. If you're following the California gubernatorial election, number of things are very interesting now. Obviously, if you're not aware already, the previous frontrunner in the race, Eric Swalwell, dropped out last week due to very, very bad allegations of sexual misconduct, to put it lightly. To put it bluntly and directly, he's a creep, and he should be put, taken out of office, obviously, then placed underneath the jail. But it's not about Eric Swalwell. This video instead is about the major beneficiary of Tom Steyer's or of Eric Swalwell's dropping out of the race, which is Tom Steyer. I haven't really been following the campaign super closely before he became the front runner, but before he was in the lead. But luckily, right as this happened, I think the first place he visited after Eric Swalwell left the race was actually Santa Barbara. I'm at UC Santa Barbara. Isn't that just perfect? So I went to this Eric Swalwell event last Wednesday. It was a town hall. And I did a little bit of research on Swalwell, or on Steyer, Jesus Christ, on Steyer beforehand. And he was also on Hassan Piker's broadcast, which I did watch that interview. And so I had a bit of an idea of what Steyer was talking about, but I was ultimately pretty unsatisfied with him as a candidate, which is why I was so excited to see what he was bringing in terms of, I was excited to see, as a political science major, right, what sort of changes Steyer would make with such a huge gap now, or such a huge absence, the front runner dropping out of the race. I was excited to see what sort of positioning that Steyer, Jesus Christ, it is 420, I can be forgiven. But I was curious as to what kind of positioning Steyer would pursue, because you see this in Michigan, for example. You have three candidates in the Michigan primary for senator, Michigan Senate primary. You have Haley Stevens, who's the establishment candidate. You have Mallory McMorrow, and you have Abdul El Sayed. And the other three of them, Haley Stevens, dog shit, horrible candidate, very establishment, very useless really. I mean, she's like a goody. She's like oh golly gee, oh wow, I sure hope I don't have to have any hard votes as a senator. Oh gosh, I just don't know what I do. And it's hilarious. Actually, I literally have never heard her speak until that recent town hall thing or Democratic Party event where all the candidates were. That's a side point though. You have Stevens, then you have Mallory McMorrow. Now, Mallory McMorrow is interesting. She is trying to strike a balance between Stevens and the other candidate in the race, because Mallory McMorrow is not really a candidate, or at least she's not representing herself as the kind of candidate that she is, and which I'll get to. So Abdul Sayed is the progressive candidate in the race. So you have establishment and progressive, and then you have in between Mallory McMorrow. But Haley in between Haley, yes. So Mallory McMorrow, in terms of trying to figure out what sort of positioning to take and how to win this election, given that you have a very adamant, staunch progressive and you have a very conservative candidate, is that she decided that she wanted to strike a middle ground of talking like a progressive, saying things that progressives probably would say, I guess, but not standing for anything progressive, not caring about anything progressive, and not advocating for anything progressive. And so I was curious what Steyer's take on the huge gap or the huge absence in the gubernatorial election would be. And I mean, I found out. To put it short, for people who have heard enough of my yapping, I think Tom Steyer is going to be the next governor, and I'm fairly excited about that prospect. This is more so because Gavin Newsom is an evil, incompetent piece of shit, and Tom Steyer, what I don't believe to be an evil, incompetent piece of shit. I don't know if he's incompetent. I don't know if he's a piece of shit. But what really matters in politics is if you're evil or not. Sometimes you really do want a piece of shit on your side. Gavin Newsom, for example, if you're in the Democratic establishment, if you believe in what the Democratic establishment believes in, which is capitalism, but pretending to not believe in capitalism in order to win elections against Republicans, then Gavin Newsom is great. He's a how do you say, a mercenary. I keep coughing into the mic. He's a political mercenary, and he knows what he's doing. He's a piece of shit, and he's good for the Democratic Party. So, but what really matters is if you're evil. There's a difference between being a piece of shit and being evil. Being a piece of shit is, the interpersonal conduct. It's the way you treat other people. It's the, consideration you give to other people. All that type of stuff is being a piece of shit. Do you put your grocery cart back? Not that matters, but being evil, on the other hand, being evil is more of an active choice to side with the forces of darkness in the world. And that's what establishment Democrats, establishment, well, all Republicans. That's what, in general in the West, most political parties represent, or most of the parties in power at least, right? Most establishment parties, because they need to perpetuate the system that is very violent. That was a side point from something else. Again, it is 420. Please forgive me. But hold on. I'm gonna. Yeah. So I don't know if Steyer's a piece of shit. I don't know if he is the other thing that I mentioned earlier. It was very brief. It was fairly short. But I do know that he's not evil based on the way that he communicated. And so pretty much, right? Like I said, I want to see what sort of positioning he has. There are things that I care about in politics, things that I, view my political career, or that I want to center my political career around. I think one of the most important among them is spreading class consciousness to Americans. So it's not just enough to be a popular politician. It's not just enough to be a politician who gets good legislation passed that improves the conditions for average people. To be a good politician, in my view, a real politician, one who stands for something, is to educate in your role, using the bully pulpit, using the increased attention that you have to enlighten and inspire the masses. I think that people's perceptions are the primary tool of oppression in our society as it's structured now. It could be something else in a different sort of construction. But I think as we have it now, people's perceptions of themselves, of their worth, of their role in society are the things that prevent all of the change that I would like to see as a socialist. And so when I think of things, ways to educate the masses, ways to spread class consciousness, one of the most important things, and one of the things that I love Bernie Sanders most for, is that Bernie Sanders would talk about working class politics, so poor people. He would say the words poor people. And as a poor people myself, it's very meaningful. Nobody gives a fuck about poor people at all. Literally, it's not. It's just it's so accepted in society that to describe how people don't care about poor people, people would go, oh, well, why is that bad? Oh, well, somebody, I don't know, it's like you got to work hard, stuff like that. But so those are the two things that I really loved about Bernie Sanders. And Tom Steyer, the man comes out swinging just like he is Bernie. He did a little speech to the overflow crowd before the event, because it was overbooked, it was overcapacity, because people, there's clearly some excitement here, not maybe or maybe not for Steyer himself, but for the politics, the process. Lots of old people as well. There's excitement, but there's excitement in the sense that the people who would go out to brunch are not only not going out to brunch, but are now engaging in politics in a serious way with long-term thinking and consideration for consequences beyond just a particular election cycle, which is a form of consciousness, especially amongst those older, more educated people. That's a whole side point. But so he's giving this speech, and he's talking about PG&E and how they're spending a bunch of money against him. That day, it was last Wednesday, so April 13th or something like that, or 13th. Anyways, and he starts going, he goes, it's a very small number of people. And I'm like, dude, he's doing the Bernie finger thing, dude. This man is really, it's crazy. It was a little bit ridiculous. It's like he's trying to transmorph into Bernie Sanders. And, he gave answers on, so, I wrote a whole article about this, but it's not published yet, so I can't really, I can reference it, but I wanted to link to it ideally and then kind of have a parallel analysis, sort of, but Steyer answered questions on a number of things. And so among my favorites, first of all, single-payer healthcare. One thing Tom Steyer did when he was asked questions about healthcare and what he would or what we need to solve healthcare problems, first of all, he's very, very realistic, right? One thing about single-payer healthcare that's not nearly discussed enough, that's not a part of our political messaging, which it needs to be, right? Because the function of political messaging is to change the debate. You have to break the frame. The frame is nothing but a construction of the average of what is out there. You need to put the best shit out there, or else the best shit has no chance of making it into the frame, especially when we already have the frame of debate polluted with horrible ideas, with horrible healthcare policy, or non-existent healthcare policy in the case of both parties, as a matter of fact. But when he was asked questions about healthcare in the state, he would say things like, Medicare has been cut. All of these people who need healthcare services are stuck. They're stuck. They're fucked. What are we going to do? We need to pass Medicare for all because we need to care for those people. And the only way we can care for those people and do it in an economically sensible way, do it in a way that actually ensures that nobody's falling through the cracks and that we're not instituting this huge bureaucracy that's going to waste money and reduce or worsen the outcomes for the people receiving care. He was like, no, we need single payer healthcare, which is just the case. And this is basic mathematics. This is basic statistics. There's no ideology in advocating for single payer healthcare. As a matter of fact, single payer healthcare is probably one of the most straightforward, simple policy solutions, even for capitalists, even for people who love the system and want to, have sex with fucking dollar bills, Mr. Krabs himself. Single-payer healthcare is the solution because when you look at an insurance pool, the goal of an insurance pool is to spread risk amongst the population. When people get sick, when people are unhealthy, you don't want them to have to shoulder the burden of paying for those costs all at the same or all from them at a moment's notice. That's not a sustainable or reasonable way to build a system. A better way to build a system is to have every single person in society contribute a portion of their money towards the collective society healthcare money. And then with that healthcare money, when a person becomes ill, they're then able to be treated with the funds available without having to go bankrupt themselves. It's genuinely the only way to do it. And not just because I care about these people. I don't necessarily care about Barbara and her chronic heart condition. That's not my business really. But what I do care about is the fact that there is no sense of safety besides that, because everyone at some point will enter into these high-risk pools. It is necessary as a product of living. Either you died before you got there, in which case, I guess you're saving on healthcare costs that way, right? Or you got old enough and sick enough to need this healthcare. So there's no alternative to single-payer healthcare that I've ever been proposed in the American system, at least, that was a better solution. There is no better solution, which is why that is the way you need to talk about single-payer healthcare. So big dub for Steyer on that one. The second one that I really liked, although this one was a little bit more unclear. So when Steyer went on Hassan's broadcast, Hassan Piker, he was asked by Hassan, so Hassan now has this sort of litmus test of questions that he asks candidates. He says, what 5 things do you want to do? He calls it the Zoran method to their face in the interview. He says, what 5 policies do you want to pass as your tenure in office or during your tenure in office? Zoran method, let's go. Name 5 policies. And Steyer was a little bit, he was not on so solid ground. And I saw a little bit of an evolution from that when he was responding to a question about climate change. It was from an educator talking about their students and the fact that they were wondering, what can we do about climate change? We're concerned. We want to be involved. We want to help. We want to be the solution. What do we do? And how do we educate more people on the problems that we face? And, this hits especially hard for young people. It hit hard for me as a young person. When I was 9, I got all my friends together. I was like, guys, we need to write a letter to Obama to tell him to not do climate change. Because my mom used to always have on the, what is it? I want to say Discovery Channel, but it's not. Was it the History Channel? Whoever is watching may or may not be aware of the History Channel, or I think it's the History Channel, and they have I can't remember, but they have these documentaries about like the big storm, and it's like a whole little documentary thing. And they're like, oh, look, this is what it would be like traveling through the eye of this super hurricane that's going to form if this happened. It's so like stupid and hypothetical, but it was also very useful for creating a consciousness of disaster, of the worst case scenario. And, I wanted to write a letter to Obama, and I gave up because politicians are evil, and I kind of realized that. But another side point, Steyer, he has a 4-part climate policy, and the 4th part is what I want to focus on. The first part was like a make polluters pay, very good one. I mentioned that in my plastic bags video, that ultimately this is an economic calculation. In order to change the outcomes, you have to change the economics. That's very basic. It's straightforward. It's something that every politician should be able to articulate. But so it was like make polluters pay, address the structural racism in our pollution practices, and blah blah blah. It was something else for the 3rd thing. Or maybe something else for the 4th thing. But the one that I want to talk about is the the one that I would like to talk about is the climate sequestration policy, right? So recently, especially as we have sort of accepted not the consequences of climate change, because obviously no one is, at least most people aren't willingly, going to work every day and feeding into a system that's going to destroy their quality of lives for their children and for them in their older age, and by older age, I mean 10 to 20 years from now, and then only worse every decade from that point on. People don't want to do that. People don't realize that they're doing that. Which is why people need to be educated about climate change, which is why it's important to try to spread this. But our elites are, Jesus Christ, I'm so off topic. But our elites they do want to end the world. They don't care. So people have been, pivoting to climate sequestration. We can just take the carbon out of the air and put it in the ground. And, that's stupid. That's stupid, but necessary, which is exactly where Tom Steyer, I think, nails it. And which is where I think the effects of his actual tenure as governor will show more, because this is something else China's beating us on, but, that's another video. He was talking about how we need to do carbon sequestration, which, I think it's a silly idea for the most part. It takes a lot of energy to turn gas into rock. And if you're trying to turn gas into rock and then bury it? Like what nature does that all the time, which is exactly what Tom Steyer said. He's talking about sequestration, and he's like, net zero doesn't mean zero. It means net zero, which means we need to take some out as we put some in, which, blah, blah, blah. And he said we need to do carbon sequestration through Mother Nature. And I was like, you know what? I mean, my God. That's all. Because I mean, I got so excited when he said this, and I was reporting, maybe bad form, but he was like, yeah, we need this, and we need to take the carbon out of the air. And I was like, ooh, and are we gonna say through trees? Because trees are made out of carbon dioxide. The thing that we are polluting the planet with and trying to end the planet with can be fixed with trees. End of story. End of sentence. End of everything. Stop cutting down old growth forests. First of all, ever, everywhere, forever, for the rest of all time. So one thing about old growth forests, right? And this is like the short term thinking of capitalism and how it manifests itself and how it degrades our living standards by removing the humanity itself from our relationship with the world, which is what I talked about in my last video. Old growth forests are the reason that really, really old antique furniture, furniture, why it looks so good. You have these really dense rings of trees because they've grown for years and years and years and years, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so you have these really tight grains, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful, tight, resilient. And I'm not 100% sure on this. I think they're more fire resistant. That could be completely made up, though. But we have decided that we're going to cut down all the old growth forests, make furniture out of them one time, and then have these much younger 20-year tree farm operations instead. That's so stupid. If it takes you 20 years to harvest the trees from the area, and every 20 years, that means at all times, you need to have trees ready for 20 years from that point. Why is it not just as sensible to increase the scale, increase the time frame from 20 years to 120 years? Not really. Maybe something like 60. I feel like it's like a gimme, right? But increase it to 60 years, and then every 60 years you could harvest trees. It's the exact same process. All you have to do is just wait for a little bit. Just wait or expand. Either of which I don't necessarily even have a problem with. But that doesn't happen. And maybe there are better reasons. Educate me if I'm so out of the loop. But that is to say, that's a good policy. Tom Steyer, he knows ball. What can I say? But now, while I do like the policy, final thing actually, this is very, very good as well. He was talking about responding to homelessness. And one of the things about Gavin Newsom that so frustrates me is that Gavin Newsom, and so motivates my belief that he's an evil creature of Satan, is that Gavin Newsom decided at one point that, I'm not winning this homelessness thing. Shucks. Guess I'll just be evil then. And he decided to film himself taking apart homeless encampments himself and allow just shitty policy and not really do anything in terms of wealth redistribution to address the challenges people face with housing. And the reason I say challenges people face with housing is because it's not just homelessness. The idea that it's homelessness is one motivated by paying attention to a certain kind of people's interests and completely ignoring another kind of people's interests. This is exactly what I mean when I talk about poor people. For every poor person in the planet, well, maybe not on the planet, I know in this country at least, every poor person everywhere, the number one thing on their mind for all of time, unless they are a very small portion of the overall impoverished population who do have access to subsidized housing. But for most people who are poor, the number one thing that they're always thinking about, always stressing about, always working towards, rent. It's always rent. And when rent doesn't get paid, bad things happen. But those bad things aren't you sleeping on the street. Those bad things may be you sleeping with your cousins for weeks, for months even. Maybe you living in hotels like I did for years of my life. It may be sleeping in the car. It could be, it could be going place to place. It could be sleeping in a shelter. I mean, I've been in shelters as well. It could be going to my mom, she's a single mother. We went to like a women's shelter or something like that, where it was just us. It was a bunch of single mothers with, a fuck ton of kids. And we just kick it in a big ass room with a couple of beds. And that was the vibe. All of those things are just as, they rob people's dignity from them. And that's one thing. And that's what I mean when I say the psychology of our system is maintained on, or that the structure of our system is maintained on breaking the psychology of people within it. Because if you don't believe that you can get better, if you don't believe you deserve better, if you don't believe better exists, then you can tolerate this. If you believe that you just need to work hard, that if you were just doing a little bit better, you're so close, you're this close, you can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it, you can breathe it in, but you'll never get there. You'll never get there. That's what our system runs on. And so when Tom Steyer addressed questions on housing, one, as an urbanist, he talked about high density housing, near transit, which I think is entirely and completely the correct focus. I think I have opinions myself about how we should actively change the way that we build housing, as opposed to passively through these sorts of rule changes and just hoping that the incentives produce the outcomes that we want. But I still believe that that policy on its own, that is like low-key, it's a secret crack formula that'll just get us pretty close to where we need to be, with no other things involved, although we do need other things as well. And And that was great. And the next thing he talked about was we need to build everywhere. He got a NIMBY question. He said, look, we got to build there too. And he said we need to build enough so that people don't have to face these issues in the first place. And he talked about how a lot of people who are homeless, who have mental health issues, got them from being homeless because being homeless is going to give you mental health issues. And that was great. I really appreciated that. And I thought that made, it shows me that he isn't evil. He is not fighting on the wrong team. And that's a very important thing in a politician. And it should be the bare minimum. It is the bare minimum, but it is not what we have been receiving as the bare minimum. It's what we know we deserve, it's what we believe in, but it's not what we get. And so that's why I like Steyer, and that's why I say he's going to be the next governor as well. Because the fact that he's using that messaging, first of all, makes his message very broad-based appeal. The best thing that they can do is try to smear him as a billionaire. And if he responds to, oh, you're a billionaire, with class-based politics, it's over. That's crack, because these people are unacknowledged, poor people. Saying poor people in a political campaign, that is like, I feel seen, I feel heard, It's like people... I don't need to see Princess Tiana. I need to have a politician say poor people and say it again and again and again and have everyone say poor people all the time. That's the representation I want. That's the representation I need. And that's why, I very much, I think that is heading in the right direction. And I think it's very politically durable of a message, especially in a time of such precarity like this one. That being said, there is one way where I am concerned about what Steyer, how hard he's going to be able to go, right? When you look at Zoran Mamdani, there's one reason Zoran Mamdani is such a good mayor, and that's because Zoran Mamdani is very prepared to be the mayor. Zoran Mamdani is a well-read, informed individual, informed of not only global struggle, but domestic struggle. Zoran Mamdani, for those who are unfamiliar, in 2020, when Tom Steyer was actually running for president then, there was also a candidate called Mike Gravel. Mike Gravel was an Alaskan senator who was in his 90s, I believe, when he was running. And he was a former Alaskan senator. He read the Pentagon Papers, which were, I don't remember what they were. Very important papers, though. And he read them into the congressional record. Cool guy. And his campaign, he wasn't allowed on the debate stage because, politics. But the people from his campaign, they started this YouTube channel called the Gravel Institute. And Zoran Mamdani he did a video there when he was a New York State Assembly member. And he was talking about how I believe it was in Austria, but it could have been slightly different. But the point is, he was talking about how we need to build more housing and how other countries' models actually allow people to not have to live in this sort of state of precarity, right? And that's what I mean when I say preparedness. Like he understands policy from an ideological perspective in a way that is complete enough for him then to execute on all cylinders. There's no blind spots, and by not having blind spots, you can then execute your vision with much more clarity. I'm not sure about that for Steyer, because when he was asked a question on Israel, and this question, shout out to the guy who asked it, because this was a Hassan Piker fan. I'm a Hassan Piker fan myself. And this guy, he said, hello, Tom. As a younger voter, who's recently been looking into your candidacy, I've watched your interviews from people like Hassan Piker, and I think he mentioned something else as well. And he said, I wonder how you as... He's like, I wonder how you view the issue. He's like, I know. He's like, I know that you're not a presidential candidate and it's outside of the auspices of your office, but how do you view continuing military aid to Israel when many young people like myself view it as a litmus test for progressive candidates, being willing to call out Israel and the genocide in Gaza? I think it had all of that in there. It might have. But Steyer responds, literally first thing out of his mouth, Bibi Netanyahu is the worst thing. Bibi Netanyahu and his government are horrible. And look, if this was October 2nd, 2023, I'd love that answer. If this was October 17th, 2023, I'd love it even more. But it's 2026. It's 4:20 today. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day outside, and it should be a beautiful day inside. It'll be an even more beautiful day when the state of Israel is no longer able to brutalize its neighbors. Don't we all agree? Can I get a W in chat? It'll be a more beautiful day when Bibi Netanyahu and his entire war criminal government and his entire structure within the society of war criminals and war criminal producing machinery, it'll be a wonderful day when they are all tried the same way that the Nazi Germans were after World War II. It'll be a wonderful day. That's the only thing that can make these days greater. And I think Tom Steyer doesn't recognize the reality that in our politics, not only given the political shifts within the American electorate, but also given the realities of what has unfolded in that region, that we as voters, we as human beings with eyeballs and consciousnesses and consciences as well, we can all recognize what Israel's doing. And we have to be against it in the most staunch moral terms. Because if we aren't, then how can we say that we are against anything? If somebody can conduct a genocide and you're willing to accept it and say, well, that government's not the greatest, but maybe the next one, we're an ally. And then he also did two-state solution. Thumbs down. But overall, despite this very major, blind spot of his, despite the fact that he will not be as staunchly against Israel as I think is necessary within our politics. And not only necessary, it's necessary because the way that Israel operates, the way that AIPAC operates, they are not a... So one of the criticisms I have about most establishment politics, establishment democratic politics as well, especially, is that it's very static. They take a situation for what it was at one point, and then they operate as if every time after that point, still operating on the same things as that. And that's just not the case. That's not how time works. Things change, and AIPAC recognizes that, unlike most political organizations do, really. And so, facing off against AIPAC, you have to be ready for all of the tools that they're going to deploy. AIPAC will send a guy who they know that you have a relationship with to go get some coffee with you and just mention that maybe you should say, I'm Israel Chai, Israel tiny nation, many enemy, Israel. And so in order to properly insulate yourself from that, you need to have moral clarity on this issue. And on all issues in general, this is, the job of having morals in the first place, right? And Tom doesn't see that. And I think that's his biggest weakness. I don't think it's going to be as salient electorally unless... Well, honestly, our country's going to start facing a lot more consequences from this whole Strait of Hormuz closure. Another thing, which he actually also mentioned, he said, you don't have to send wind and solar through the Strait of Hormuz, so why don't we have more of that? Which, dub, what a good take. But as the situation deteriorates there, I think there may be more consequences for this softer language on Israel and maybe more political benefit from, going after Israel harder. It also could be the case that the room that we were in was much older. And I think that also influences how a politician and how a team would, try to angle their responses. Although I will say he also was not very much more forceful than that on Hassan Piker's broadcast. So these also may just be his own beliefs, in which case I really do hope that he has the foresight to adjust those beliefs to the current situation, as opposed to continuing to operate on as if it is, 1904, as if it's 1996, and Bill Clinton is old Tricky Dick is doing, or Tricky Bill, whatever. That old Big Willie is doing it to him, Big Willie style. That's not where we are, and it's time to move. And I think as long as he does that, and which I think it might just be necessary, I can give him a full pass, and until he does that, I can give him a tepid acceptance. I will not fight against Tom Steyer, and I think he'll probably be a pretty good governor, much better than greasy, gruesome guillotiner of the poor and homeless Gavin Newsom. But shit, this video is long as hell. Hopefully, if you watched all the way through, you got something out of my analysis. I tried to be a little bit more illustrative in this video because I am high as hell. I'm not even that high. I literally hit the pin twice, but for the fellow stoners out there, you know that hitting the pin puts you in places you didn't really expect to be. So